Our greatest journey is not conquering the mountains, the sea, or space. It's to become fully alive, to have faced adversity and mowed it down, to have stood still in the face of our monsters and watched as they vanished, poof, into the ether. It's this journey that calls to the hero within every single one of us, heroes like Ryan Laplante. Ryan Laplante has earned 2.5 million playing live tournaments. Amongst his resume is a 10k Pot Limit Omaha victory at the 2019 Poker Masters and a World Series of Poker bracelet, which he won in 2016 when he conquered a field of 2,483 entrants in a $565 buy-in Pot Limit Omaha. Laplante is also the co-founder of the online poker training site Learn Pro Poker. And in this episode of The Hero's Journey, we talk to Laplante about his humble beginnings living in a trailer park, how it feels to be gay when growing up in such a small community, and how he learned to control an array of emotions that were on the verge of destroying his poker career. So without further ado, I'm going to shut the hell up and leave you in the capable hands of today's hero, Ryan Laplante. Welcome to the Hero's Journey podcast. Ryan Laplante, how is life?
Everything is going very, very well. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing absolutely fantastic. Got a little bit of a niggly cold. Everybody in my house has got it. But I'm one of these people, Ryan. Everyone's dying around me with this cold and all that kind of stuff, right? And my missus is saying stuff to me like, don't kiss me on the lips, you'll get a cold. And I'm like, I'm not going to get anything. I'm like strong. I'm I'm not thinking like that. And generally, yeah. I don't get ill. I mean, what's your views on the power of positive thinking?
Positive thinking can be a really good tool. It can help you stay motivated, especially like when you're downswinging or just, things are going pretty rough. But as in terms of it impacting like the world around you, I'm not quite on board about that. Obviously, there's stuff to be said about health. Just because, the reason why the placebo effect is such a strong thing is that your mind can impact the way your body reacts to things. That's why they have to do double-blind studies and all that stuff to make sure that it's not being caused by just your mind thinking that it's doing better. So in terms of maybe of being healthier, it might help a bit just because you convince yourself that you're not going to get sick and your body, maybe fights things a little bit harder. But outside of that, I'm not really much of a believer that it'll affect things. I do think that it's an important trait to have, that you should do it, but not that it, affects the world around you.
So you're a poker coach. So,
yes.
I'm thinking about, these top sportsmen that, they close their eyes and they think and feel. They're trying to get the emotion of the 100-meter sprint or the swim that they're doing. Because they believe that their mind doesn't know any difference between the image that they're creating in their mind and the emotions compared to what actually happens. So is that something that you would do yourself in poker and teach other people to do in poker in terms of visualization? Or is it more about the technical aspects of the game when it comes to poker?
There is some stuff to be said about being confident and having a good emotional mindset going into, a big final table or a big day 2 or day 3 or so on and so forth. So I am all about making sure that you are in the right frame of mind and mindset. But I also still believe that the, most important aspect of doing well in poker is more about being very well prepared. And yes, part of being well prepared, excuse me.
We both got the coughs.
No, I just have a slightly sore throat from talking a lot and doing these things. Also, it's just very dry here. I even have a humidifier running and it still affects me. But yeah, I think part of being prepared for grinding and for doing very well is about mindset. It's about being in the right frame of mind. I do believe that is incredibly important, but also equally as important is making sure that you are on top of things from a technical aspect. So generally when I'm going into a big final table or a big day 2 plus or whatever, I generally might be a little bit nervous leading up into it. But once I do actually sit down and, start playing, then I'm all about just being in the moment and analyzing decisions. And so, I might not necessarily, truly meditate myself, but I'll try to do things to help get myself into the right frame of mind leading up to it, try to calm those nerves, making sure I'm not eating too unhealthily, making sure I'm sleeping well, doing that kind of stuff to really make sure I'm in the right mind frame and well prepared going into whatever event or whatever day of grinding. One of the best ways to prepare before, just playing a session or, big day 2 or big 3 is doing like a review session from deepest run the day before, or reviewing, let's say you're going into a big day 2 online, then just reviewing day 1's plays and, using that as a means to prepare your mind to be thinking about, poker in the right analytical, mindset, and using that as a means to kind of take your mind off of the fact that you're going to be playing in a really big situation.
With your poker hat on, which you literally do have your poker hat on, I interviewed, I've talked to him loads, but every time I talk to Dominic Niche, who obviously has got his little app, right? So yep. Every time I talk to Dominic and ask him questions about mindset and emotions, he laughs and he kind of brushes me off and he says, it's irrelevant. Like, emotions in poker is irrelevant. And yesterday I interviewed Ben Pollock on the Hero's Journey podcast. Yep. And Ben Pollock said, GTO is a load of old nonsense. Like, it's a load of old rubbish. So you got Ben on one end of this event, you got Dominic on the other end. Give us your views on those two comments.
I guess I'm going to be right in the middle of them. I think that being incredibly well prepared and being, the Dominic Niche side of things is very, very important. Like, you need to have that aspect of your game the best that you can possibly make it. Studying solvers hard, reviewing, going through sessions, doing that kind of stuff, putting in the repetitions is beyond belief important. But that being said, all humans were emotional beings, and at our core, that is who we are. Obviously, there are some exceptions. There are people that aren't really emotionally attached to, when they're playing at all. But for, the 99% rest of us, there's always going to be some aspect of our mind that is going to be thinking about, to some degree, those who are less prepared and less confident might be worried about whether or not they're going to be playing their best, whether they're going to be making good decisions, whether or not they're going to make a mistake that could cost them, thousands or many thousands of dollars, whether or not they're going to do something that makes them look stupid or feel stupid, especially if it's on like television or if it's, some major stream thing. Going into that being nervous and being uncertain is normal. That's to be expected for virtually everyone. That being said, it's also really important to make sure that, when you are going through those moments of self-doubt, that you are balancing that off with, being well prepared and using that preparation as a means to be confident and comfortable. But you don't want to be to the point of arrogance. You need to be confident and comfortable in your decisions, but if you are overly so, then you won't prepare yourself enough to be in that type of right mindset and, approaching things with a very clear mind. Obviously, Dom is right in the sense that, being emotional can be a very, very bad thing at the table. You don't want to be overly confident. You don't want to be overly nervous or worried or scared or any of that stuff. You need to be able to be very clear-minded so you can think things through at a very analytical level. But that being said, whether I'm playing online or live, I also rely very heavily on my instincts in a decision. And those instincts, to a decent degree, are relied on pure feeling. Maybe not true emotional feeling, although that can be true as well. I might just be analyzing the situation based off of the fact that my opponent just got sucked out on for a lot of chips. And I pick up on something that, maybe there's someone that's really good at protecting themselves from timing tells and sizing tells and, just tells in general, but they just lost a big pot and they're kind of thinking, they're not at their emotional best. So they let something slip. And because I'm paying attention and because I'm allowing myself to just be completely and totally aware emotionally and mentally, all that stuff, then I'm a lot more apt to be able to trust my instincts in a spot like that. And, to me, instincts in poker, yes, to some degree it is, just preparation and practice and that kind of stuff. But it's also at its core being able to, analyze your emotions and analyze your, not at like a conscious level, but at a subconscious level, truly self-actualize all the decisions and everything you've seen and being able to make a good decision based off that from both an analytical standpoint and then also from that instinctual standpoint. So to me, playing poker is, I guess Ben saying that it's pure art, and Dom is saying that it's pure math and theory. And I think that it is definitely a mix of both. The math and theory build a framework and foundation for your game. And then the artwork is what really, truly separates, good players from great players and great players from, the absolute world's best.
I was laughing actually when Ben said about the art, because here I am interviewing this gorgeous kind of like real stereotypical French kind of like artist talking about art, and then you've got Dom, like, the robotic German, Vorsprung Dirk technique. You can teach someone GTO. We can see that. I mean, I've been fiddling around on Dom's app, and I actually really like it. I think it's really, I have fun doing it.
Definitely.
But can you teach creativity?
Yeah, of course. Just like you can teach someone to be an artist, not all great painters or musicians or whatever started from a point of, they didn't start from just being elite. They had to build to it. And as you build those fundamental foundations for people's games, you enable them to use their own personal creativity to create their own game and their own approach and thought processes. Obviously, like, I don't think I could ever teach someone to play exactly like me or think exactly like me, but I could get them to think and approach about the game as the same general total framework, and then use their own personal playing experiences and life experience as a means to develop their own unique, game thought process and approach. There's plenty of my friends that all of us, think about and, try to study the game to very in-depth levels. And we use a lot of the same types of tools and thought processes in order to build and approach the game. Yet we all still play very unique, distinct styles. And that is based off of our own, personalities and creativity and, comfortableness and so on and so forth. And, obviously I couldn't exactly take someone and teach them the exact same type of creativity as me, but I think by helping them build their foundation, that you help them be a lot more comfortable with putting their own personality and character into their game.
Yeah, I went to my daughter's 3, and she goes to a school called Imagine, and the curriculum or the curriculum, I guess, is called Reggio, comes from Italy. And what they do is they don't necessarily they never tell kids what to do, or they never give kids the answer. So if a kid turns around and says, "Is that rock dead?" right, which my daughter said, "Is that rock dead?" The teacher will say, "I'll say, because of a bad habit, no, it's not dead, it's a rock." But the teacher says, "What do you think? Do you think the rock is dead?" Like, how important is asking the right questions as opposed to telling people what to do in poker really important?
I mean, I think it's just like the rest of the learning process, that it is incredibly important that, when I'm doing coaching sessions, some of the more intense one-on-one sessions are less about them asking questions, although some of my students that are a lot more advanced, there definitely is a lot of back and forth. But in terms of like, for the most part, I think it's, especially with poker, it's something that is so complex and so in-depth that helping someone build their framework and then getting them to ask more questions, it'll be a lot more efficient of a means as a way to learn, versus just having them not really know where to start. So I first help them get the foundation to know what types of questions are worth being asked, and then use that as a means to help them learn and grow. Obviously back and forth and, asking the right questions and framing things in the right type of way, or in a lot of different ways to figure out what the right type of way is to think about and approach it, at least from our current understanding of the game. I mean, we certainly have such a ridiculously long ways to go in terms of what, GTO poker truly is going to be, especially for tournaments. But, obviously it is truly, truly important, but I think it's also really important to make sure that they're starting from a point of framing questions in the right type of fashion, so they are, good, useful questions. That being said, once they do have some type of framework, then there really isn't a stupid way to think about or approach something. It's just as was it Thomas Edison? Isn't the quote that he didn't fail 1,000 times on creating a light bulb? He found 999 ways, to not make it, and then found the right way to do it.
Yeah,
And
those 999 helped to make it.
yeah, exactly. And failing in poker and not doing the right things, or quote unquote making the right decisions, or even asking the right questions, all of that are important aspects of the learning process. If you ask any successful business person, or anyone that is elite in their field, that their game, that their life, that their success is built around their failures, and being not necessarily okay with failing, but using those failures as a learning tool to improve and get better, and constantly searching for what is perfection in their field. That to me, that is my goal. Is I know that I will never be a perfect coach or business person or poker player or anything, but I will always try my best to strive for that, and that I know that I'm going to fail many times along the way, but I can use those failures purely as just a good learning tool. In fact, there was actually, it's perfect timing for me. I was so I'd made, it's going deep into day 2 of WPT at Aria this summer, one that I final tabled, and at the end of the night, so we're 10 hours into the night or something like that, and I played a hand versus Jim Colpoy's Mr. Big Queso online for old school players listening. And I just really punted a hand versus him, just because I was like, my logic in the hand was correct up to a point, but I didn't finish the thought process and then make my decision. I went through 80% of the decision making process and then stopped and followed through at that point, which if I'd followed through that extra 20% and actually finished the total thought process of the hand, I wouldn't have made the mistake. And it was a pretty big pot. It was worth a lot of money, and it meant that I went from being a really big stack to being an okay stack. So and it was right near the end of the night too. So my 30-minute drive home, normally I would have just been thinking about how badly I've, really, screwed that hand. And instead I was actually listening to an NPR piece. I believe it was a TED Radio Hour, and it was literally about failure and seeking perfection. And, part of the discussion was from someone that, there was 2 different thought processes. One is that, perfection is all that you should strive for, and that, failing is not okay, that not, that making mistakes, that you should be harsh on yourself. And then the other side of the thought process is more the tech approach, or the modern tech approach, which is, your success is built on your failures, and the failures is just a means to learn from them and improve. And I was fortunate to have that to listen to instead. So instead of beating myself up over that mistake, instead I was able to just think about what it means to make those types of mistakes, and how I should be framing and thinking about them, and making sure that it is from a learning process. And generally I'm very good about that. But, when you're in the final, 35 of a 10K with $600,000 and your first WPT final table and title up top, I was obviously pretty frustrated and annoyed with myself. And that's generally the only time I really get truly annoyed these days, is anytime I know that I did something that I wouldn't have done if I just given myself the time to think it through and make the proper type of decision.
It sounds like what you're talking about. The key here is learning the ability or the skill, which I think it is, to actually not to be afraid of failing. So
definitely.
What you talked about there on the radio was the fixed mindset, growth mindset. And I know people, and I've been fixed mindset is still a part of that about me. So I've certainly been in spots where I've been afraid to fail. And I've also been in spots where I've been oh, fuck it. I'm going to have to go for this even if my gut says. and you always, you always know that as you get older and wiser, you can see that. So I think as a coach in life or in poker, trying to teach people or build up their courage to make a mistake, I think is crucial,
Definitely. I mean, especially with launching, my training site, I was terrified the entire length of it. Even like when I started like building structured content for it, like planning it from the start. I guess it would have been a bit over a year and a half ago, almost years ago is probably when I actually really started planning out content. Even like back then, from the start, I was kind of worried about whether or not it'd be successful, worried about whether or not I even had the type of ability and knowledge that would be, well received and would be, useful really to, teach to a broader audience in this type of fashion, especially with how saturated the market is and how, when you're putting out a product like this, you're really put under the microscope and every little failure is, overanalyzed and really punished. So if you're not, striving towards this, whatever concept of perfection, people just really tear into you. So you're really putting yourself, under a spotlight that, if it goes poorly, is just, an epic failure in a lot of different ways. And especially start of last year when I really started to make content, I realized and I found out how much work it was going to be. I've put 700 plus hours into making the content just this last year, and putting all that work into it, if it had been a failure, that would have just been, it would have been crushing. It would have been devastating. And when I started working on it, especially as we got closer and closer to it being like a launchable product, I just got more and more nervous and scared. Even though I knew that I was putting out a product that I was proud of, I certainly am, definitely a perfectionist, especially when it comes to, making training content. I was still obviously just terrified of it either not being as good as I thought it was, or it just being poorly received, or it just not being the type of product that, people would actually be interested in, or that it would help them at all. I, made the content, in large part to, have it be a useful thing that people could use and learn from and grow from, and, try to achieve the type of success that, sorry about that.
It's okay. It's okay. On what you were saying there, Ryan, the first episode that was released on this Hero's Journey podcast was an interview with Andrew Lichtenberger. And it went out, and Rio sent me the link, and I got all excited to tweet it out because you've done some content, you want to share it. I go over to YouTube, I see the comments. First 3 comments are like, "Oh, this is great, wonderful content, keep it going." And then the last content is, "This is appalling," or something like, "This interviewer doesn't know what he's doing." And then the other one was, "This interviewer is so cringeworthy." And all of a sudden, in that moment, you go from like being in a real happy, kind of productive, I've done something good for the community mode, to like, I'm cringeworthy. And then straight into childlike Lee, like, oh, someone doesn't like me, But I'm quick now to deal with that a lot better. And when my I Am High Stakes Poker interview with Igor Kurganov went out the other day, I just didn't go to YouTube and even look at the comments, right? How do you deal with that? Because poker's not like rainbows and unicorns.
Yeah,
like people don't give a
certainly
fuck.
is a brutal industry for sure.
I don't know what the fuck goes through people's minds, but yeah, people do it. I mean, how do you handle it?
I mean, a lot of those comments and and your own negative reactions to it comes from places of insecurity. People that want to put others down are generally very insecure about themselves, and when you are aware of that, it makes reading and seeing and dealing with that kind of stuff a lot easier to do so. If I just see something that's like people flame the content or whatever, I just don't really care about those comments. It's the more constructive comments that are like actual true criticism. Those are a lot more apt to make me upset or annoyed because it's something that I should have noticed or saw. But after I get over that little moment of, I should have done better or whatever, then I just see what they're actually saying, see what the problem is, and then I just, handle it, deal with it, and fix it. Even when you do really poorly in something and you are beating yourself up about it, it's your ego saying that you should be better than, this, that you should be perfect, that you should be, this bastion of success, and, that all that stuff. And the thing is that, we're humans and we make mistakes, and, it doesn't, failure and mistakes will define your life and every aspect of it, no matter how hard you try or how perfect you think you are. And, when people are willing to put that down, it's not really a you thing, it's more of a them thing. And when you do make mistakes and you are beating yourself up for it, you just have to realize that, it happens. It's okay that it happens. You just have to, screwing up and making mistakes is not, that is just part of life. And it's more about how you deal with and accept those failures, and, work through them. Something that I'm definitely not a person that is about there's the Dom approach of not having emotions, or especially like for playing and stuff, or, when you're working on stuff, or I'm more along the lines of that Ben Pollock type of attitude that, your emotions and feelings and that type of stuff, they are important and they do matter. And, your ego and, which develops and shows those feelings, that is an important aspect of who you are as a person. And that, trying to control that to completely end it or kill it or whatever, or suppress it, I think that is a bad thing to do. I think that the best thing that you can do is just analyze them, see them for what they are. Sometimes those emotions are very irrational and ridiculous and bad, and, they should be at least looked at, laughed at, and then crushed. But a lot of the emotions and feelings and stuff that you deal with, they're very legitimate, reasonable, rational things. Like, say, if you lose a loved one or a friend or something like that happens, then, being devastated and being, crushed, that's normal. And you should be feeling that, because when you lose someone like that, that is a, life defining moment. And that, that you won't be able to build those new experiences and feelings and interactions with that person ever. And that should be devastating. If at your core, you are even at your core as a rational, reasonable human being, that should still devastate you. And that if it doesn't, that shows that you're suppressing your emotions to such a degree that it's unhealthy. I think, the healthiest reaction to emotions isn't to suppress them. It's to just deal with them, go through them, analyze them, go through the whole process of feeling, but, also analyze it and make sure that they are reasonable things to be dealing with. And if they are, then, just dealing with it and processing it. And then once you're through the end of that process, that will make you a better, happier, stronger individual overall. Suppressing your emotions doesn't really accomplish anything, really. It stops you from feeling. And that's not, that is not a healthy way to approach life. So I'm all about that. Like I said, I'm definitely an in-between. In life, in poker and everything, like, I believe that it is incredibly important to try to do your absolute best with regards to making sure that you make your decisions in the most rational, analyzed, structured process, but that also the feelings of the situation, your feelings or the feelings of those you are dealing with are, matter equally as much. And, then when things do go wrong, things outside of your control or even in your control, and you make a mistake, that analyze what happened, deal with it, work through it, process it, fix it. And through that's how you are successful in, in life and business and poker and whatever.
I want to spend a moment to provide you with some incredible value from our sponsors, Run It Once Poker. Run It Once Poker is the place to play poker these days, spearheaded by the incredibly talented, humble and big-bearded Phil Galfon. It's an online poker room for players created by players. And if that appeals to you, then head to once.run/hero play today, and you can pick up a 100% welcome bonus worth up to a ceiling of €600. Now, there are two elements to this deposit bonus that made me want to take all the money I've saved to buy my daughter's Rani the Disney fairy doll and plonk it in a Rio Poker account. First, it never expires as long as you play one hand every 30 days. And second, your deposits during your first 30 days count towards the bonus. So if that interests you, head to once.run/hero play today. It is tough with poker as well, though, isn't it? Because like I'm in the same school of thought as you. However, I'm reminded of like listening to Olivier Bousquet interview Dan Coleman the other day, and Dan turned around and said to play poker and have to kind of let's say turn the volume down on our emotions in order for us to perform well when we're playing. If we're grinding and really going for it and doing that regularly, I think he was on the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was almost like he was saying, I don't like the person I then become in my life. So then poker becomes a problem for me, because if I play for so long and I'm always turning the volume down on my emotions, I find it difficult to then put that volume back up to a right balance level in life.
Yeah, I obviously, try to suppress them to some degree when I'm grinding, but I'm fortunate that it's pretty easy for me to, like, once I'm done with my session, that I've already like let go of that thought process and approach and everything, generally within a few minutes. That being said, that also means that, like, when I'm playing, because I'm not, completely suppressing my emotions, that I do have this constant inner battle to some degree of my ego saying that I deserve to win that flip, or that I shouldn't have gotten sucked out on, or so on and so forth. And in the past, that would like really negatively, impact me. But as I've gotten a lot better and more successful and, just more comfortable with the swings and just everything about it, then, when I, have something wrong happen, especially if I know I screw up a hand, I'm going to be slightly negatively impacted for a couple seconds, but I'm also just going to deal with it, process it super quickly, and keep playing and grinding. It's very, very rare that I have anything happens that affects my thought process or decisions for, longer than a second or two. And, I think if I was taking that approach of purely suppressing it, then that would certainly cause issues. And that's what I was saying, that I think that completely suppressing your emotions or trying to in poker, I think that it can have negative impacts, that it can impact the rest of your life negatively. And that's why I don't try to completely suppress my emotions. I try to hopefully turn it down a little bit, but that I'm mostly just playing and thinking with all aspects of my mind, that I'm not just being this robot, that I am being a emotional creature, and then I do my best to minimize how my emotions will interact while I'm grinding. Like if I'm playing online, I try not to watch all ins. Like if I get an all in, I'm just not looking at that table. I'm just, because when your mind is attached to an outcome and you watch that outcome occur, then the moment that outcome happens, whether positive or negative, your brain will go, oh yes, or oh no.
Yeah.
And by not watching it, instead, when you look up at whatever the outcome was, you're not rooting for it, you just find out what happened, which makes it a much calmer overall experience. So I do a lot of things like that means I don't really have anything, that means I have a lot less to have to suppress. But it's usually when I'm nearing the very end of a session, especially like this last Sunday, I got completely crushed online. And it's usually at the end of that type of session when I get like sucked out on in a really brutal fashion, that my emotions might break through momentarily, where I might be momentarily like actually frustrated, and then I end up again just analyzing it, dealing with it, processing it, and moving past it, versus just suppressing it. And yes, that means that I'm going to be throughout my session slightly more emotionally on edge, but it also just means that I can grind full time and play tons of hours and work a lot of hours and do all this stuff and not feel as though it negatively impacts the rest of my life.
Sounds like you're very human. Right. Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the archetype typically starts in an ordinary world, and the hero, which is you in question at the moment, then, goes on this journey to a special world. So we're going to start with your ordinary world. So I'm going to ask you a random question from a pack of cards on family. So I don't know what the question is going to be. If it's too personal, just say, and we'll pass and flip and go to a different one. All right.
Okay.
What's the relationship between how you were messed up as a child and how you might mess up your children as a parent?
Well, I don't have kids and have no intention of having them. So probably not a relevant question.
Let's ask you a different one. What bad trait of your father's have you inherited?
Well, so my biological dad definitely had a lot of demons. Because I didn't really get to know him that well, I don't really know exactly what those demons, what they came from. So they might have been emotional demons, but he certainly had, issues with like addiction, alcoholism, drugs, that type of stuff. So my mom and him essentially split up when I was like 2 or 3. So I never really got to know him very well. But I've always had at the back of my mind that, having a family history of, addiction, that, when I play poker, that part of it might come from that point of addiction. So in my life, outside of poker, in poker, that I've always tried my best to make sure that I'm constantly analyzing whether or not I'm, becoming, obsessive or doing something to the point of where it is having a negative impact on the rest of my life, which are definitely points in my career where I let, my desire to be successful in poker, and my obsession with the game and industry to kind of like be very one-minded. And, it was a good thing in the sense that it helped lead me to where I am today, but there were time periods where it negatively impacted the rest of my life. So I know that I've like made that type of mistake in my past, and I'm now a lot more, I've grown up a lot over the last, handful of years, as generally occurs when you go through your 20s. And, I've been able to look back at those mistakes and just learn from them and realize that, I know that I have those types of inner demons, that it's built into my genes, but that as long as I'm constantly aware of it and just being vigilant, that, that they're not going to control me, that I'm going to, for the most part, stay in control of, who I am and what I want and all that stuff. That being said, like so my mom, she's been with my stepdad for 22 years, and he is the exact opposite of that. He is a very old school, old fashioned, started business from scratch, very, very successful, incredibly hardworking, never dealt with any of those like issues and stuff. So I had a wonderful role model in my life to teach me how to be, the opposite of that, of that person controlled by their demons. So I was very fortunate with that. And my mom as well, she's a very intelligent, empathetic, and, very controlled person. And, obviously, I'm sure they both have their issues and stuff, but they both were wonderful role models and still are in terms of how to control myself, how to, go after things that you want in life and be successful and not be controlled by those aspects of who you are as a person. I think everyone in life has, things about themselves that, are either, that they just personally dislike or are true demons in terms of, things that can completely crush and destroy themselves if they, allow them to take over. And that, being open and being willing to discuss about this stuff, that, hey, we all deal with shit. It's just, it's a constant battle, and that, as long as you're willing to just put up the good fight, that, you can be successful and happy and, and go through all this stuff. Obviously some require extra help, and that's okay. If you do need, extra help from friends, family, from psychiatrists or therapists or whatever, that go for it. That, there's so many things in life that are incredibly, incredibly difficult that you do need help on, and that is completely and totally okay to need that help.
I never met my father either, and I remember the conversation. You know, like you think back to your earliest memories. One of my earliest memories is a conversation with my mum about the fact that my dad wasn't my biological dad and what
Mhm.
happened to him. Can you remember that conversation?
Um, I mean, my mom and stepdad got together when I was like, I think they started dating when I was like 6.
Mm.
So, I was pretty much always aware of it. So there
You mean
wasn't really,
you was aware of a time when your stepdad wasn't in your life, so it was just you and your
yeah,
mom.
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
So there was like that transition period. But yeah, there's definitely like going from her not seeing anyone to having this person in my life was definitely a big change. But I'm sure it had a huge impact on a lot of different aspects of me as a kid. Obviously, now as an adult, it's hard for me to really pinpoint exact things, but it's definitely been a very, very positive impact for sure.
Was there a little bit of that's my mom. It's like me and my mom, and then this guy comes in, like starts kind of like
No, I don't think so. Just because it was it wasn't like a quick, it wasn't like a super quick thing.
mm,
They definitely took it slowly. And I have an older brother too, who's a year older. So, having someone else, in my life was probably just a positive thing. I didn't really view it as like as a negative thing at all. I don't think.
and what part of the world did you grow up in, and how did that part of the world kind of mark you? Because a lot of us,
Mhm.
I'm from South Wales, so there's a small town mentality about me
Mhm.
sometimes. What is it about you?
Very same actually. Before my mom and stepdad met, we were living in a small town called Royalton, Minnesota, a town of like 900 people.
Right.
And we lived there from let's see, age 5 to 8, essentially. And it was the transition that we went through while there is pretty crazy too. Is because when we first moved there, we were not well off at all. We were living, in a trailer park, in a let's say I would say maybe like a 400 or 500 square foot trailer, and trailer that didn't have like proper heating or any of that type of stuff. And we're talking about winters that hit -40 Celsius. So it was definitely not the best experience with that. But my mom had started her own small business, single mom moving to a small town in central Minnesota, starts her own small business, and it's successful. It was a video rental store. And as the business was successful, then we were able to move out of trailer park into a proper house, a old creaky, also still cold place, but an actual proper house. And then once they met, then we ended up moving to to me at the time was a big city, a town of about 30,000 people called Brainerd, Minnesota. And then I essentially lived from age 8 to 18 there. And my stepdad having a very successful business. So essentially, over a very short time period, went from being very poor to being very well off and making all the transitions in between, which was certainly a very unique experience. I'm sure not many kids get to deal with something like that. And also going from living in a very very small town to living into a bigger size city, essentially a big town, I guess, would
Mm.
be was certainly an interesting transition because when I was in Royalton, like I think my entire grade had maybe like 30 people or 25 people in it, while in Brainerd I graduated with a class of 600. So it was certainly a big change for me as a kid, going from essentially knowing everyone and knowing most of the kids in the school to not knowing anyone in my class. And obviously that was a very big transition, but it was definitely a very positive thing going from that incredibly tiny town, because I got to experience small town life, going wherever I wanted, biking the whole city, knowing most of the people, that type of experience, to living in a more of a larger town with a lot more things to do, a lot more experiences, a better learning atmosphere. For sure, in terms of like schooling and that type of stuff. That was one of the main reasons why we actually ended up moving in first to Minnesota, was that my mom knew that they had some of the best public schools, and then in part why we moved up to Brainerd to be A, closer to my stepdad, but B, they just had much better schools.
So what was you like as a child, and how did you fit into society? Like how did you fit into the tribes? Was you an insider, an outsider? What was going on back
Oh,
then?
so I was definitely an introvert. I love to read. I've always been a huge book nerd. My mom has been as well. And so I spent most of my childhood just reading as much as I possibly could. And especially being gay in such a small town atmosphere. Yeah, Brainerd was like a quote unquote bigger city, but it still central Minnesota, in the early 90s, well, mid to late 90s and then early 2000s, not exactly a liberal bastion, not exactly a lot of out people in my city that I knew of or anything like that. So, and, like most kids, you develop your first crushes when you're 6, 7, 8 years old. And I, developed my first crushes around then too. And so knowing that, other guys didn't have crushes on other guys really, that made me definitely a lot more introverted than if I was straight. So it definitely pushed me towards, reading more and, doing that type of stuff versus being more outgoing. I definitely had like plenty of friends and, still did sleepovers and all that type of stuff. But I was definitely a lot more reserved and controlled and worried because especially through like middle school, junior high, and high school, because I was always worried about people finding out that I was gay and being bullied and all that type of stuff. There was only like, say in my class of 600, there's maybe 2 or 3 out kids, and they were definitely not treated the best. So I was obviously very worried about that. And like that definitely hung over my entire, childhood. But it was definitely, honestly, it was overall a very positive thing because it certainly has made me a lot more empathetic and understanding, knowing that people deal with lots of different things and that it can be very, very difficult. That even like I was very fortunate that my mom is incredibly liberal and always told me growing up that, if we were ever gay or anything like that, that she wouldn't care and would always love us and all that stuff. But I also know how very fortunate I was to have that type of loving and accepting family versus, many, many, many kids that deal with, getting kicked out or, being bullied from their own families or, all these things. And, you know, being very aware of what people deal with and, going through a lot of it myself to some degree, that it certainly makes me, a bit more empathetic of a person, which to some degree, to be on the more Ben Pollock side of things, makes me a little bit better of a poker player too, because I can be empathetic of, what my opponents are dealing with in terms of their own thought process and emotions and that type of stuff, which enables me to use that against them from the more, strategic and combative side of things. Is that using that empathy as a tool to be, a better poker player, a better strategist, and it makes me both. It makes me a better overall person, I think, and makes me a better overall player, having dealt with and gone through that stuff. Nothing like adversity to really
Yeah,
trick you in your mind.
definitely. I mean, we have a 3-year-old, like I said earlier on, and when she's a book nerd, and we buy books on everything. I'm a vegan, so like she has a veganism book. She has a book about understanding her sexual parts and boundaries and what to do if people, and people might think, well, she's 3, but we think that's important. And similarly,
Right,
similarly explaining to her and books about how some people, she was at dinner the other day with a friend of hers. She just dragged this kid out of gym class. And we ended up having dinner with him and his mum, and she was gay. So explaining to her that this child has 2 mums, and there's a child that have 2 dads, and but then there's a part of it that when we talk to her, she'll always go, "Yeah, but I'm going to marry a man," and then we'll be like, "Yeah, but you can marry a girl as well." "Yeah, but I'm going to marry a man," and I can see that is all kind of like shaped by literature, the world, society. So what was I know it's difficult because you're 5 and 6, and I can't remember when I was 5, 6. What's going through your mind back then, though, when you are attracted to boys and the world around you is saying that's not right? How do you process that? What's going on?
I mean, honestly, just terror. You're just constantly scared, really. That's all it comes down to. I mean, especially back then when there's a lot, and this is why I think representation matters to such a ridiculous degree, is, if I'd seen individuals in society that were, well respected and successful and that type of stuff, and were openly gay, that I wouldn't have, been so scared and worried. and rest of society would, in fact, especially growing up through that age, when I was like really young, there's still don't ask, don't tell. That was still a thing. You couldn't be openly gay in the military. So from every standpoint, all I saw were that gay people were treated as second class citizens, and we really were back then. We still are now to some degree, and that when you're constantly when you're worried about that, you don't really have positive role models that you can truly relate to, that makes you a lot more scared and worried and introverted, and really makes things a lot more difficult. But as society has gotten a lot better with this kind of stuff, it's gotten a lot better about representation, that kids are going through at least slightly easier times than what I went through. And that, this is why I've always been, so open about everything. So I can, even if I only positively impact one person through doing it, that to me, that it is worth it. And I know that we still have a very long ways to go, even in the US. Sure, we recently passed, gay marriage federally. That was 4 years ago now. And yes, we've been making a lot of progress, a lot of different things. But the way you can tell that, one of the easiest ways that most people can immediately relate to and understand that we still have a long ways to go with this stuff is look at the number of professional athletes in the United States. There's like 10,000, major pro athletes. And especially if you look at like the most popular sports, and sports seen as like the most masculine, sports like football and basketball and baseball. In those sports, there's like maybe 2,000 or 2,500 professional athletes at the top level, and there's not a single current openly gay athlete out of 2,500. I would bet extremely heavily on 50, and I would take the over on that, being openly gay, or being gay. And especially if you include like bisexual and everything else, that you could probably put the over on 75 or 100. And there's not one, not a single person. And, that just means that all those people are still worried about it having a negative impact on their careers and lives. And if they can be at the elite of their game and not be open about who they are because they're worried about that, then there will be like opponents that say, oh, it doesn't really matter. They can just, be who they are, and that representation and stuff doesn't matter, and that media and stuff shouldn't shove it down their throats or whatever. But the thing is that if these people who are elites at what they do aren't willing to be open and out, that means that, we still have a long ways to go. If 50 years ago, if it was, accepted, just completely, totally okay and fully accepted by society to be gay, and there were out athletes back then I guarantee you that there'd be tons of out athletes now. But because it still has these stigmas around it, about what being gay is, or what, your sexuality is and defines and all that stuff, then that means that, all these people aren't willing to be out because they know are very worried about how society will treat them. And most people probably won't really care, but there's enough of society that does, that they're worried about their professions. And that, that happens in many other industries. There are many, many, many industries still in the US and especially globally where being openly gay is a career suicide. It's not okay. And we've made lots of progress, and there are plenty of industries where it's okay. But the fact that there is so many that it still isn't means that we just have such a long ways to go. And that's why I've always been, once, going through childhood and having to be, very worried about this stuff. As an adult, having a career where my sexuality, that, someone can't fire me or anything. It's just I play and I grind, and I, being a tournament player, I don't have to worry about the politics of cash games or anything like that. I can just be me and, have that, I can just sit down, put up the money, play, and be successful or not based off of purely the decisions that I make, not about whether or not someone likes me or not. And, that has enabled me, especially like the type of platform that poker players get, with being able to do interviews and things like that and getting media attention and that type of stuff, that I'm fortunate enough to be in a type of situation that, I can be out in public for those who are too worried about things like the profession in order to come out. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I have an 18-year-old son, so I have kids at both ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a friend when I lived in Ogmore Vale, where I grew up, which had 3,000 people in it.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend, I would, if I had to pass a lie detector test, I would say I didn't think the guy was homophobic or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But my boy come up to me one day and he said, "Dad, I don't like it when he comes in, because he always says to me, all right, gay boy," or "shut up, gay boy."
Mm-hmm.
And my son then, because of societal conditioning, is like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't be gay. That's wrong.
Right.
Or that's, like you say, it's like almost like subhuman. I cannot be that. Like, this cannot happen. And then on the other aspect of it, you've got this lad who is saying, "Hey, gay boy," and I don't even think he even comprehends what he's doing and how that affects society as a whole through his behavior. My dad would say the same things to me. No idea the gravity of what they're doing. And if you actually did raise it and say, "Actually, hang on a minute, I don't think you should be saying that," then boom, you light a firework, and now there's a big argument about it, right?
Yeah, that's definitely something that, using gay negatively, it's still definitely a thing among kids and teenagers today, but it really, really was among kids, teenagers, and adults growing up. And, people, tend to really talk about how much the language that you use really matters. And it's because of things like that, how you frame what you say and what you use in terms to negatively describe things or people, that can have a negative or positive impact on those around you. I've seen so many poker players talk about how, they don't think it really matters, stuff like that, or things like representation or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But, I can promise you it certainly does. And that your words and what you say and how you act and how you treat those around you can definitely have very negative or very positive impacts on those around you. The number of kids that end up, being suicidal or committing suicide who are GLBTQ, the reason why those numbers used to be so high and still are very high relative to the rest of society is because of how poorly they're treated. It's not because, being gay makes you more apt to be suicidal. It's because when people around you, say that, use things like gay as negative, or, insult people for those types of things, for being, less masculine, things like that, it's, of course, it's going to negatively impact people when all of society kind of acts and behaves that way. So this is why, the language that you use is so incredibly important.
Yeah, I agree. And on this hero's journey trajectory, there's a moment in every script where the script writer has to write this inciting incident. There's something that happens in the life where it's a defining moment that is gonna be the theme for the rest of the story. And ultimately we then go, "Oh, what's going to happen at the end of this?" Right. So in yours is what we're talking about now, about like learning with handling being gay when you were younger. What was the moment? What was the inciting incident? If we say that like the end goal is you to be fully out there, being yourself, being really proud of who you are, having your platform, and really refusing to be anonymous to inspire other people and have that courage and change minds. If that's the end goal, what was the inciting incident that led to that happening?
I mean, honestly, just in college, I, was able to come out and be myself. We built up, so one of my good friends, who's someone that's still one of my best friends now, I met him, I want to say my maybe second day of college, and just this very big, jovial, very outgoing guy. And he ended up starting a student group. I ended up helping, build it up, but it was honestly mostly him and dragging me kicking and screaming along the way. And by the end of the year, it won student, like best new student group, best student organization. And he ended up being voted freshman class president, and the next year student class president, as a, see here. He was a freshman at age like 25 or something, 24 or something like that. So as like an older college kid, quote unquote, and going back through being much older than everyone, he was able to, build these groups, and, really have a positive impact on many people there. And he is openly bisexual. And, being friends with someone that is so just out there and loud and proud and all that stuff definitely helped me a bit. Like I came out right when I got to college, just so it was easier, being away from small town. I went up to Duluth, Minnesota, area of like 150, 200,000 people. So being openly gay there was certainly a little bit easier. Also, just being away from that small town atmosphere certainly made me more comfortable with being able to come out. But, immediately meeting someone like that, who had such a, positive impact on me certainly helped that transition to be a lot easier. The student group is actually called Amoeba. It's a massive organization embracing benevolent attitudes. So it's all about just being open and happy and, treating each other with love and respect and kindness. And through that group, we actually started a poker group.
Right.
And we had we started a weekly league. And so we had like semester long leagues and we would play cash games and all that stuff regularly. So essentially my entire year of college, I only went the 1 year because I didn't go to class really. I just played poker and hung out with people. But that 1 year of college was me just playing poker and just meeting people and becoming less introverted and being more just okay with who I was as a person and individual, and actually being able to start dating and doing that kind of stuff. So it definitely helped immensely with just opening me up as an overall individual and human being. And then, of course, with playing poker, with playing live and online, Poker Stars and all that stuff was still available in the U.S. then. It was pre-Black Friday. I was grinding online a lot, plus playing live, and I just really fell in love with the game during that year. And then, about halfway through the year, I was, anytime people would like ask me what I wanted to do or we were talking about it, I would just tell people that I was going to play poker for a living. And here I am. My 1 year of college, I actually did what I was going to do as a profession. Obviously, when I told my parents I wasn't going back to school, I was going to focus on playing poker full time, they were not the happiest, to say the least. And honestly, I certainly don't blame them. I by no means, like after that year of college, was I successful. I was like beating micro and low stakes games for a good win rate. I was certainly making some money, but I wasn't like crushing it. I wasn't like a lot of the guys that were dropping out of college to play professionally. I was certainly on the bottom end of the spectrum. So I, spent just years grinding up through the stakes and, really struggling through, plenty of times in my career, after Black Friday, where I was certainly just really, really struggling from a financial and even emotional standpoint. But I certainly was able to overcome a lot of those diversities and swings and stuff. And,
If you harbour dreams of one day becoming a pro poker player or just want to win some damn money every now and then Run It Once has your back. Before Run It Once Poker stole the spotlight, it shone very brightly on Run It Once's training site. Run It Once is the most talked about poker training site this side of Emma Royd's back passage. And as a thank you for listening to me and our incredible selection of heroes, they're giving you the opportunity to learn from some of the best players in the world with 2 brand spanking new training videos added daily if you sign up through once.run/hero learn. And if you sign up today, you'll also get access to 3 elite training videos, including one from the great white shark of poker himself, Mr. Philip Galfond. Talk about Black Friday. What was going on then?
So Black Friday was a month before I turned 21. I was living in just north of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'd moved towards Milwaukee to be closer to one of my exes, and I've got family in the Milwaukee area. So I was living with family, and then I started seeing my now fiance, essentially husband, but now fiance, about 6 months before Black Friday. And then when Black Friday hit, as a 20-year-old living in Wisconsin, where the gambling age is 21, and I had nothing to do. And with it being that close to the World Series and stuff, my plan initially for the summer was to just, go out for the last week, play the main event, do that stuff as a 21-year-old. But when Black Friday hit, instead of spending months grinding online like I was planning on doing, I didn't really know what I was going to do. So I essentially spent a month just moping around and watching a quad jacks that they were just like on every day talking about what was going on and all that stuff. It was a really good, community to listen to and talk to people and try to figure out stuff. And I ended up, a buddy of mine ended up telling me that I could just stay with him during the summer down in Vegas. So I went from thinking I was just going to play the main and maybe a couple other events to instead scrambling to sell for a full summer package. And then my first summer down there, so actually the month leading up to turning 21, it was first just being miserable and listening to quadjacks and stuff, and then scrambling to sell a package. And because I realized I was going to be playing my first summer at the World Series and doing a full summer grind, I was waiting at the casino doors the second I turned legally 21, so I could go into the poker room and play cash and get in practice. Because I played a little bit in a casino, between the ages of 18 and 21. In Minnesota, it's 18 plus, but I played maybe like 5 live tournaments or 4 live tournaments or something like that. So, and I barely played any live cash outside of like some random limit stuff. Plus, the stuff with friends in college that year, but that didn't, doesn't really count. It's such a different experience compared to being in a casino. So I was obviously really wanting to get practice and get experience in. And my actually my business partner with Learn Pro Poker, I actually met him in that casino. Right. And I might have met him my first night there was probably the night that I met him, because he was grinding all the time back then and generally play through the night. So I met my business partner there, which has obviously been a very fruitful and useful connection for sure. And then my first summer there at the World Series, I essentially bricked like the first 20 entries in a row, just like straight brick. Had like nothing happening, nothing going on whatsoever. And then I got an min cash and a 1K. And then the very next event I played was my first final table at the World Series. So 21 years old. First place in that was $560,000. So 21 years old and playing for $560K in a bracelet, which, I've been, while I fell in love with poker that year in college, I started playing poker with friends in junior high and middle school, during the moneymaker effect. When that happened, that's when I started playing poker with friends and stuff. And I really enjoyed it back then. And I was always into like competitive gaming and that type of stuff. And then I restarted getting back into poker once I turned 18 and could make my first legal account. So I've been like kind of dreaming to some degree about playing at the World Series and doing that stuff since I was like 12. So at 21 years old to be on
your first one.
Yeah. My first time at the World Series to have my first final table was such an incredible experience. And it's such a roller coaster of an experience too, because going into the final table, so back then you'd combine at 10 for the unofficial 10. And going into unofficial 10, I was 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10. And by the time we were on the official FT of 9, I was chip lead.
Wow.
And then I took 8th.
I know, I see that. 2,192 people, right?
Yeah.
Back
so
in 2011.
Pretty sick like, series of events. And honestly, at first I thought that swing, that going, having that shot of like making 500 grand and, it was obviously a life-changing amount of money, a top 3 finish would have been. But I'm actually very thankful that I ended up taking 8th. I think like an 8th place or 9th place or even 7th place finish would have been like perfect, because it's enough that it like lights a fire in me that makes me really want to get back and work hard and improve and get better. But it doesn't give me a bankroll to just set on fire, which I think if I was like, at 21 years old, if I had won that event and had a $150,000 bankroll at the end of it, I'm sure I probably would have gone broke or, nearly so. And that dusting off that bankroll, I don't think I would have been emotionally able to handle it. That right. At the time I was definitely a very incredibly emotional person and, dealt with tilt issues and all that stuff. And, if I had like punted off that bankroll, I might not have, stayed a professional. It might have just like devastated me and I might have quit because of it. But instead I had enough success that I thought that, I could play and compete at a professional level and be successful, but not so much that it wasn't, something that I could destroy. So I was still backed. And I used that final table and success the rest of that summer as a means to convince my boyfriend at the time, now fiance, to move up with me to Toronto for 6 months.
Right.
So in November, after being together just over a year, we moved to not just a different city together, but a different country together. Yeah, and we're there for 6 months. And the first 4 months of being up there was probably the hardest time of my entire career by a mile. Going into moving up there, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to be successful and do well. I asked, it was a big ask to convince him to move away from his friends and family and job and all that stuff. So, when I'm providing for both of us and asking so much from him, and then, me being successful up there, was incredibly important, obviously, for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
If it was a complete failure, how could I continue to convince him to put his faith and trust in me that I could provide for us and make a living and do all this stuff? And, convincing my backers to being willing to, finance everything and do all that stuff, I had all this pressure on me. And the first few months was the worst downswing of my career at the time. I want to say playing like a 30 average buy-in, I dropped like 25 grand or something like that, maybe 30 grand. And, during that entire downswing, I'm just putting more and more pressure on myself to do well, because instead of like doing well, I'm just doing poorly and losing and losing and losing. And I'm sure I was losing for a lot of different reasons. A, I was probably running kind of bad, but B, I was like such an emotional wreck, and I was letting the beats and everything get to me. And it was like early to mid-February, and I was playing in some event. I got super deep in it, and I, got sucked out on. It was probably a beat that might have been worth enough money to like clear my makeup. I knew it was like, I remember it being worth a lot of money. And I, was so angry and frustrated that like I cussed really out loudly, essentially yelled and like slammed my table really hard, and I like knocked over a glass. And I, obviously my, Chris was very unhappy with me doing that and reacting like that. And, a fight ensued, and, we'd been in Canada for like 4 months, and I was just doing terribly, and I was reacting terribly, and I was just a complete wreck. And at that point, I like, after everything calmed down and all that stuff, and we had a long discussion and everything, and I realized that if I didn't get my emotions and everything under control, if I just didn't deal with this, that it was just going to end my career. So I, before that, working up to it, obviously I was still putting in tons of time and effort trying to fix my mindset, and I just had that be my number one goal. And one of the things I started doing actually was not watching all-ins. It's one of the simplest things I do. In fact, you can actually, if you shark scope me, you can see the exact day that I stopped watching all-ins. You can tell literally to the exact day. And my graph just goes straight up. And I realized then that how important mindset and working on this stuff, how important it was. So I spent essentially the last 8 years of my career constantly, working on that. And I know that I still have a long ways to go, as a person, as an individual and everything. But it was I would say that, if anything, was like the turning point of my career. If any moment had to be, it would be that exact moment.
So like, every hero's journey has all his lost moment, the moment where you're really down and out, and the viewers think, how's he going to get out of this one? You get out of it, you get into the mindset side of things. You said you was a reader when you was a kid. I mean, did you read mindset books? Did you take mindset coaching courses?
Anything that you could possibly.
What worked for you? What were the best things?
So the thing that worked for me actually was Tommy Angelo's Elements of Poker, but more importantly, his blog.
Right.
There was actually a blog post that he had written a while back that was talking about gratefulness. And, it just made me start realizing just how many things in my life, that I am deeply, deeply grateful for. Things like super simple things like, not being sick currently, or only having a slight throat scratch currently.
Yeah.
Not having, not being blind, not being paralyzed, not, having access to fresh water. Now in my life, I have so many things to be deeply grateful for. But even back then, I still did as well. But I just, when you're so focused on, providing and being successful and all these different things, and you put all this pressure on yourself, instead of thinking about the things that you do have, you're just thinking about what you're working for. Which it's important to have things and goals that you're working for and things that you're trying to, achieve, that motivates you and helps you be more successful overall. And, actually have a purpose in life, which is incredibly important for everyone. But, if you're only focused on that, then you lose sight of what the things that actually matter, the things in your life that you do have that are going well and that you should be grateful for. And I think that pretty much everyone in society, for the most part, can find plenty of things that they are grateful for, and that using gratefulness as a means of being happy, I think, is one of the most important things that you can do as an individual. Because otherwise, if you aren't constantly, thinking about things like that, then it is so easy to go into the spiral of like depression and beat yourself up over things and all that stuff. Many successful, wealthy individuals are completely and totally miserable. And I think it's in part because of, they haven't practiced being grateful for the things that they do have in their lives that they should be happy about. Obviously, some people just have, chemical imbalances and deal with depression and things like that. And I'm not minimizing that to any degree. But I think that those that aren't, that don't have those issues, that a lot of being happy is more based off of how you think about and approach things and being grateful for what you do have versus any level of success. There are plenty of people who, in this industry are working for many different things and can be at many different degrees of success in the game and in life and in everything, and can be equally happy. So it's not based off of just like achieving X to be happy, which a lot of people do think that if I achieve a bracelet, or if I get $100,000 score, or if I do X, if I play X, I will be successful / happy. Which you'll see a lot of people achieve these types of things, but then they'll re-enter their spirals of destruction, and they'll give it all away or throw it all away or do whatever. But if they, the entire time through that journey, that they were instead focusing on being grateful for the things that they do have and still trying to achieve these things, then when they did reach those things, that they would be a lot more appreciative of it and be a lot happier when they do actually have that. And if they don't reach it, that they'll still be happy. And to me, that's like one of the most important things. That I'm sure that if, Learn Pro Poker, or if, any of the other things in my career more recently had gone poorly in the last year or so, that I would still be an equally happy person right now. I would, certainly have things that I could look back on and be a little bit more frustrated about, but that wouldn't change, my overall degree of happiness, really. And that to me is a thing that I am certainly the most proud of. The way that I've changed as a individual over the last 11 years of my career, going from being a very emotionally controlled kid with a lot of inner demons and that type of stuff, to being a much more happy, focused, successful individual. And that I've been very thankful for all the people in my life that have certainly helped me achieve these things, as I wouldn't have been, I certainly wouldn't be here without their help over the years.
Yeah, I mean, like every journey, if you think about the classic Lord of the Rings, these little dudes have got to get to Mordor and destroy this ring, but there's all these obstacles in the way. And we've spoke about some of your obstacles so far. Is there anything missed? Any other major obstacle that you had to get over to get to where you are today?
I feel as though those were really like the main things, that just like dealing with my emotional control and tilt and things like that were certainly the biggest things. I mean, I've had certainly far worse downswings than, that first one, but that one definitely had by far the biggest impact on my life and career. The worst downswing of my career was actually 2 years after that. I went down to play WCOOP in Mexico. I was backed by a different individual at the time. And I and the rest of his stable all downswung so hard that he actually ended up essentially going broke and had to drop everyone. But even at the depths of that, I was in a much happier and better mindset than my first down swing, which was way less bad and for a lot less money. And
because you wasn't prepared to deal with it
because I
emotionally.
wasn't prepared to deal with it emotionally at all. I mean, I still obviously have my, moments over the years of, beating myself up over things or being frustrated and that type of stuff. But the last 3-4 years, I've just gotten way better at dealing just with everything in general. So I really haven't had, moments like that for, honestly in 5+ years, really. Which, and that's not to say that it's easy for me now necessarily in terms of dealing with that stuff. I still at some point, part of me is still that very emotional person, but now instead of, letting those emotions control me, instead I, analyze them, process them, go through it, and then, come out the other side and realize, when I'm being ridiculous or not. And that means this summer. This summer I played my first ever $50,000 buy-in event. At the World Series, and I played the 50K no limit. Start of the summer, and first time I've ever played an event that high, and I was taking a shot in it, a pretty big shot for me personally and mine backers, and then of course I'd sold a chunk too. So doing poorly in it, obviously I put a lot of pressure on myself to try to play my best and do well, and I was the first person to bust. I busted 300 big blinds deep. Which obviously is slightly disappointing, playing my first ever true high roller event, and to not only not have it go well, but be literally the first person to bust the event and to do so 300 big blinds deep in a very weird and interesting hand. Certainly even 4 years ago, it would have just devastated me.
Yeah.
But instead, after I busted, I went to a table nearby and just wrote out what happened, typed out the hand, typed out my thought process, the scenario, why I made the decisions that I did, posted it, and then hopped into a $500 buy-in event right after busting a 50K.
Yeah.
So I went from busting it to playing a $500 buy-in event, and I think playing that $500 buy-in event very well within 20 minutes, which I feel as though most people just wouldn't be able to do that, but B, also it would have been reasonable if I'd been upset even the next day or 2 days about it.
Yeah.
If I just skipped that 500 and just waited for a 1K or better value event or whatever. But instead I'm nope, this is this was my plan. If I bust a 50K, I'm hopping the 500, and that's what I'm doing. It's a great value event. I'm not going to skip this just because I did poorly in something, and I was in a good mood and played well, and to have to be such a big difference where, especially when I first started grinding, getting tilted about losing 75 percenters and $2 180 mans to busting a 50K. And it's not that I didn't care that I busted. I cared a lot that I busted. I wanted to do really well in that event.
Yeah.
It's more that I knew that I played well, that even though the hand is a ridiculous hand, definitely one of the most weird, interesting spots in my career, I know that I played that well with the right thought process and decisions from both a theoretical and situational standpoint, and that to me defines my decision making more than whether or not I win or lose. So being able to look back at it and just be happy with how I played, to me that means that I was successful, and that sure, I would have loved to cash in it or win it or anything, but I busted, and that's okay, and that's what's going to happen the majority of the time for all of these things. So, and knowing that I can have that happen and not have it impact me negatively to any degree, makes playing just way easier. It's why I'm so adamant about teaching things like proper bankroll management and game selection and things like that, because when you do follow these steps, then being emotionally in control and being successful is incredibly easier than if you use really bad financial decision making or playing games that you really shouldn't be. When I do poorly in an event, part of my plan of playing it is expecting to bust and have it go poorly, which is definitely the opposite of the positive mindset, quote unquote. I would say that I'm still when I enter an event, I'm positive that I'm going to play my best and play focus and make good decisions. and that's it. I'm also positive that the huge majority of the time I'm going to bust, and that is going to be completely okay, and I have no control over that. And because I have that thought process and control, and approach, then when I do bust, it's just like, okay, that I was expecting that to happen. And, so like, let's say recently I went down to play in the Gardens, 10K down in LA. So I drove down there, playing the event, busted my first entry near the end of the night. And then, had day two, had just above starting sec because of that. And then I busted the 2 max entries that I could start a day 2. And like they lasted like 40 minutes or something like that. Got really cooler, then got really coolered again for a monster pot after really building up. And those 2 entries lasted like 45 minutes or something like that. And I was actually talking with friends, and like someone was told me that I was going to do what I usually do in 10Ks, which is fire 3 entries and then come home. I was like, no, I'm probably going to win. And I was like, wait, actually, seriously speaking, I'm probably going to be home before 6. Which the only way I was getting home before 6 p.m. is if I busted 2 entries in succession within like 45 minutes of each other. And it happened. And I didn't care. I wasn't like upset driving home or anything. I was completely, totally happy. And I was happy that I went on the trip, that I drove to LA and put in 3 entries into a 10K and drove back. And that's what the trip was. There was nothing else involved with it. It was just a pure work trip that went literally the max, that I could have lost into the event. And I didn't care in the least. I was still happy that I went. It was still a good decision to go. I went for the right reasons. I busted. I came home, and I was completely happy with every thought process along the way. And that's because I was prepared for that event. That in me deciding to go, I knew that one of the scenarios that would happen would be that exactly. I bust 3 entries, I come home, I lose the absolute most, and I get the least in return for it, and that's just okay. If I wasn't prepared for that to happen, then I shouldn't have gone down and played. And to me, like anytime I'm playing in any event now, that's like the first thing is, in the worst case scenario, do I care? And if the answer is no, then I'm willing to play. If the answer is yes, I am not willing to play.
It sounds like the absolute perfect ending, because in Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the person goes from an ordinary world to the special world being poker, we'll say. They find their treasure, and we spoke about like 3 core things. I think one, right. We talked about your sexuality. We talked about poker, and we talked about emotions, right?
Right.
And it seems to me like your treasure is actually being able to better control your emotions, which then pours into all of those other things that we've talked about today. And the hero takes what they've learned from the special world, goes back to the ordinary world to teach other people what he's learned, and you're doing that through Learn Pro Poker.
Yes, exactly.
Boom. Rounded it off perfectly, Ryan. Thank you very much for being a guest on the Hero's Journey. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. Thank you for being so candid in all of your responses and being so open. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me on. I look forward to seeing the finished product. It was certainly a great interview and a great conversation, and I'm glad that I was able to do it with you.
Cheers, buddy.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you later. Let me know when it's posted and ready to go, and I'll give you some social media love and all that stuff.
Thank you very much.